Nathan Pienkowski is with Bull City Learning in Durham, North Carolina, and has partnered also closely with the vaccine delivery and immunization training and learning team, Molly and Amanda, for many years, and we're grateful to have the opportunity to hear from him. Nathan.
Hello. It's working. Excellent. All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Nathan Pienkowski, and it's a real pleasure to be here. And today we are going to talk a little bit about, we're going to peer into the human mind just a little bit to see what it may tell us about how people learn and what we might do to either aid or inhibit that process. Okay, so I thought I would start by telling you about a study that was conducted a number of years ago that involved subjects that had had physical trauma to the part of the brain that regulates the formation of new memories. So these are people who couldn't form new memories. They could remember things that they had experienced prior to experiencing the trauma, but they couldn't form any new memories. So they couldn't remember what they did the day before. They couldn't remember what they did an hour ago. They couldn't remember what they did 30 minutes ago. So some of you may be familiar with people with this condition, but they can kind of live normal functional lives in some ways, but they have to use a lot of crutches. They've got to write notes to themselves and put them in their environment just to kind of remind themselves, even why they started a particular activity. So what these researchers did is they took the subjects and they divided them into two groups. They had one group read through instructions for how to do a particular task on a forklift. None of these people had ever had any experience with forklifts before. And then they had the other actually get up on a forklift, and they had a tutor teach them how to operate the forklift, or at least perform a singular task on the forklift to the point where they could do it to mastery. So then they sent them all home, and they brought them back. I think it was maybe about a week later. And they assessed them. And one of the things they found was that, of course, as expected, none of them had any recollection of being shown a manual or being taught how to operate a forklift. And as expected, the folks who had only looked at the manual could not operate the forklift. They couldn't perform the task. But I think, surprisingly, there were a number of people in the other group that actually could operate the forklift. Not everybody, but a lot of them could. So they had no recollection of being taught this, but they could actually do it. So the point, well, actually, one of the interesting things about this study was that it was conducted by neuroscientists. And so while they were doing the study, they were in the instructional phase and the assessment phase. They did some brain imaging, and they were watching sort of brain activity while people were being instructed and while they were being assessed. And what they concluded, in a nutshell, was that not only is there a behavioral difference between consuming information and learning how to do something, but there's actually a physiological difference. Those two activities actually use two different parts of the brain. So there's a lot of really interesting stuff that we could talk about for this study, but the real reason that I wanted to bring it up here is it kind of highlights something that sometimes is referred to as the knowing-doing gap or the knowing-doing chasm. So the idea is that knowing and doing are two different things. So the reason I'm bringing it up here is just to kind of illustrate the role that science can play, or this research and these studies can play, in helping us understand how the mind works and helping us understand the best way to teach. So in the last Teach to Reach that we had in Barcelona last year, we had someone speaking named Will Thalheimer. And Will said that he believes that we're living in the golden age of teaching and learning. So over the last 10 or 15 years, there's been a lot of things that have come out, a lot of developments that research has shown us, and a lot of additional insights into the way that the human brain works. And a lot of those have been fueled by new methodologies and technologies that allow us to kind of get a deeper understanding of things. And of course, it's never been easier to kind of share and disseminate these findings. And when you add all that up, we're getting a cascade of new knowledge about how the brain works. So this is all good news for us in many ways, because if we can find a way to take these insights and translate them into action on the ground, a lot of good things can happen. You know, teaching, if you really think about it, teaching and learning is really fundamental to a lot of the things that we do in life and in work. It's certainly an important part of, for example, rolling out a new vaccine or instituting a new data reporting or data collection system. There's so many things that we do in our life and work that are affected by teaching and learning. So many of the goals and the things that we want to accomplish in the world are very much impacted by that. right? So if we can find a way to make even a small, like an incremental, small change in how effective or how well people learn and how effective we teach, when you magnify that across an entire system, you can really have exponential benefit and exponential effect. Now, it's not to say that this is easy, because of course when you get a cascade of knowledge, like if anything, you have this challenge of trying to wade through it all. How do I make sense of all of this? How do I turn this into a framework that I can use to take action against? And this is something that I've spent, most of my career for the last 20 years trying to figure out. And it was one of the driving forces behind the Teach to Reach Summit and bringing everybody together. So with Teach to Reach, we were bringing together thinkers and researchers and doers to kind of lay out on the table all the things that we've learned over the years about what seems to work and what doesn't seem to work when it comes to helping people learn stuff, basically, okay? And through all of that, it turns out that there are kind of some patterns that have emerged. When you take all these ideas and you kind of peel back the layers of the onion and you kind of look behind them and see, psychologically speaking, what's driving them, it turns out that there are kind of some fundamental building blocks that just kind of come up again and again and again. So I don't want to oversimplify things, but it does seem like there's some foundational things that really are behind a lot of these different ideas. And we have a lot of people that came from Teach to Reach who kind of talked about those things. So what I was going to do today is pull off 7 of those and kind of dig into them a little bit. And these are 7 things, it's by no means comprehensive, but these are 7 things that have been found to have a real impact on how people learn. Okay, so we're gonna dig into these one by one a little bit today, okay? So I wanted to start by showing a little case study here. I'm gonna have 2 case studies, all right? So imagine that we have a pharmaceutical sales rep. This is somebody who makes a living every day going out and selling pharmaceutical products to physicians, okay? So one day the sales rep gets a call from her boss, and the boss says this, corporate has been nagging me to get you to take this compliance course, so can you just kind of go to the training so you can get them off my back? So the sales rep goes to training, and in training they say, "Thou shalt not promote off-label," meaning you should not say anything about our products that has not been approved by the federal government. And that includes showing up and giving a research article to a doctor on a topic that is off-label. Okay, clear enough. But the pharma rep gets back to work, and her numbers are down a little bit, and all her peers are talking about this awesome article from the New England Journal of Medicine that talks about the benefit of this product in off-label use, and they're freely showing it to doctors. And she knows that she's got a performance review coming up, and she knows from history that in the performance review, what are they going to talk about? Sales numbers. They're not going to talk about compliance. Okay. So with this story in hand, you all have $100 to bet, okay? $100. Who's gonna bet that this pharma rep is gonna promote off-label? Right, who's gonna bet that she's not? Oh, great, well, believer in human nature, like the goodness of human nature over here. I love this, okay. Well, I think you get the point, but I wanna do this again in a different environment here. So let's say that we have, a nurse working in a rural environment. So she's one of 3 nurses at the facility. She hasn't been paid in 2 months. She knows she'll probably get paid at some point, but she hasn't been paid in 2 months. She's supposed to be getting supervisory visits every month. She gets them twice a year at best. When she's involved in vaccine sessions, they just get a horde of people there. There's a huge crowd that shows up, and it takes them, all day plus. They've got to work late to get everybody vaccinated. Then she gets pulled out for training, and in that training, they say, hey, here's a new data collection form that we want you to fill out every time you vaccinate somebody. And we know it's going to basically add about 3 minutes or so, maybe 5 minutes to every immunization, okay? Oh, and by the way, her supervisor hasn't been trained on any of this as well. Now, you have $100. Raise your hand if you're going to place your bet that she is going to fill out the form. Okay. So I think the point is pretty clear here that I'm trying to get at. So basically, in the real world, quote unquote, the influences on behavior are many. There are all kinds of things. The supervisory influence, peer or lack thereof, peer influence, old habits. You can just lean back on what you already know is going to work for you. The organizational, there's so many things that affect behavior. And you can see here, only one of them is skills and knowledge. There's just a ton of things. So in those two trainings that we talked about with the pharma rep and the nurse, they could have developed the skill. They may have the great skill and competence, but that is no guarantee that they're actually going to use that skill. So one of the big things that was repeated and came out of our Teach to Reach session was that ultimately, when we're talking about learning, we're usually talking about behavior change. We're oftentimes talking, our goal isn't necessarily to get someone to learn per se. Learning may be a prerequisite for what our ultimate goal is, but if we really want behavior change, we've got to think about three major categories of phenomena. One is, of course, the brain. And we're going to be talking a lot about that today. It's the brain, like the psychological aspect of learning something and learning how to do something. Then there's the body. I use that just for alliteration here, but which is sort of the physical environment, where you learn, when you learn. Conrad's going to talk a little bit about this in this workshop, when you learn. There are actually lots of different places where people learn, and where you learn. And then the backdrop, which is the social and the organizational environment in which learning takes place and in which behavior takes place. So the big point here is that training alone isn't sufficient to drive behavior change. A true comprehensive attempt to drive behavior change in an organizational setting needs to have some remedy for all of those three areas. Now, I loosely call this whole person learning or whole human learning. I just throw that around. That's just a phrase that I have used for that. But sometimes we'll actually create a whole person learning canvas, a little bit like the business model canvas or an empathy canvas, and we'll use this as a guide. So if we're analyzing a particular situation or we're coming up with some strategies, we can use this kind of as a framework for thinking through what kind of problems are we trying to solve here, or what's a good solution that's going to kind of work for us and get the behavior change that we need. Now, for the remaining 7 items, we're really going to focus on the brain part of this, okay? Because this is learning science or learning theory after all. So we're really going to kind of dig into that a little bit. So the next one, something we already talked about, but I'll just briefly to the lesson, is that there's a difference between knowing and doing, okay? So as I talked about before, there's this chasm between knowing and doing. And when we as educators address the knowing part, whether we realize it or not, what we're doing is we're leaving it to the learner to figure out how to translate that into doing. And people can translate it into doing, but it requires significant psychological effort. And if you don't have a highly motivated learner population, people aren't going to be willing to apply that psychological effort. And even if they do, if it's not guided, it's entirely possible that that bridge that they make is the wrong one. They might have the wrong bridge. Okay, so we'll skip ahead now. So we've got 2 under our belt now. Changing behavior requires more than training, and knowing and doing are 2 entirely different things. Now, we're going to do a little activity here. Do I have a Southern drawl? Okay, so I was raised and born in the South, and not only in the South, but in the mountainous part of the South. So I grew up around people with strong accents. My brother has a really strong Southern accent, and that throws people off because he's Korean, but that's a whole nother story. So I want to see if you all can detect my Southern accent, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read a list of numbers, okay? And I want you to listen to that and see if you can hear my Southern accent. And then I'm going to ask you about it. I'm going to see if you can find it, okay? All right, here we go. 8, 2, 4, 8, 9, 2, 3, and 5. Okay. For those of you who are familiar with what a Southern accent sounds like, could anybody detect any Southern accent in that list? A lot of you could. Okay. Let's start over here. When did you hear it? Like what?
4.
At 4? Okay. Anybody else? How about you? 9? Wow, I guess I didn't realize my Southern accent was that strong. It's like the whole thing was Southern. Okay. Okay, now I want to ask another question. Everyone, raise your hand if you think you can remember that entire list of numbers from the beginning to the end. Let's try. All right. Did you write them down? Yes. No, that's no fair. Okay, so nobody could. Good. All right. Let's try this again then. I'm going to read that list of numbers again, but this time I want you to try your best to remember them. Okay? All right, here goes. 8, 2, 4, 8, 9, 2, 3, and 5. Okay, who thinks they can remember it? Raise your hand if you can remember. Okay, a little bit better. Let's try over here.
8, 2, 4, 8, 9, 5.
Almost. We missed one. How about you? Yes, that's right. Exactly. Very good. Okay. So what's the point of all that? Why are you asking me to remember all this stuff? So the point of all of this is that learning is goal-directed. So basically, everybody comes to a learning task with a goal in mind. And in fact, not just a learning task, we like walk around with goals. We have goals in the back of our minds. We may be aware of them or we may not. And those goals affect what we see in our reality. We have a limited amount of perceptual and attentional resources, and so we've got to select what to pay attention to at any given point in time. And our goals are largely what determine that. So from an instructional standpoint, we can either just hope that everybody has the right goals, and those goals are going to allow them to pay attention to what they should be paying attention to, or we can leverage the fact that people are very goal-directed, and we can either give them a goal that is going to focus their attention on the right things, or we can find some goal that they already have, and we can try to leverage that and orient our instruction around that. All right, 3. Hopefully I'm going to get through all these 7. Changing behavior requires more than training. Knowing and doing are 2 entirely different things. And what you learn is dictated by your goals. More number recall. Okay. I hope nobody has any fear of numbers. That is actually a thing, by the way. Fear of numbers. All right. Another number recall, okay? I'm going to start going through some numbers and let's see if you can remember. 2, 3, 5, 3, 5, 4, 8, 0, 9, 8, 5, 2, 3, 4, 2. Raise your hand. Anybody? Okay, no one. All right, that's 15 digits, okay? 15 digits. Here's a fundamental one that seems simple, and it is kind of simple, but you could actually do a whole workshop just on this because it's super interesting and there's all kinds of implications for how you teach. But the basic idea is, this is something that's been studied thoroughly. People essentially are able to remember 7 plus or minus 2 units of information at any given time. That's what they can hold in memory. When we exceed that, it just gets lost. If we don't stop and let people process it and convert it into long-term memory via some kind of activity or reflection, it just disappears. It's just gone. So you can see, basically, we need to present information into a very paced way, and we need to stop periodically to let people process and reflect in this kind of thing. Okay, a little more numbers recall here. Okay, just a little bit more, but we're making a point with each one of these, okay? So I'm gonna read off some numbers and see if you can remember, and don't give up, but don't just give up because the last one was hard, all right? Because I think you guys can do this one. Okay, 235. 354, 809, 852, and 342. Can anybody remember those? No? Anyone? Okay, this one didn't work as well. I thought I was dealing with a bunch of geniuses here, but anyway, so what I essentially did was I took the numbers, the list from the numbers before, and I just turned them into bigger numbers. So instead of having 15 units that you have to remember, there were only 5. So that's within the limits of your cognitive resources. So oftentimes, with this group it didn't work, but oftentimes by taking the information and clustering it into meaningful units, it makes it easier for people to remember these things, okay? Okay, so changing behavior requires more than training. Knowing and doing are 2 different things. What you learn is dictated by your goals. Our working memory is severely limited, and chunking information into groups helps to overcome cognitive limits. This is the final numbers recall one here. See if this works. All right, pay attention, all right? Got to work for this. I'm gonna limit the number I'll give you here, okay? 1776, 1865, 1918, and 1945. Okay, who can remember those? Okay, 1 or 2, we got a couple. Okay, can anyone, so for anyone who remembered this, can you tell me what's different about those numbers that I just read off than the ones I read off before? That's right. They're in chronological order, yeah. But they're historical. Each one of those is historical. 1776, Declaration of Independence. 1865 is when the Civil War ended. There's a few war references in here. 1918 is when World War I ended, and 1945 is when World War II ended. Okay, so the point is, in addition to clustering things, when those things have meaning, they're easier for people to remember. People can recall these things, okay? Okay, I'm going to read a passage. Just listen to it. It's a nice little soothing passage. One cool autumn Saturday, John was out in the yard trying to fix the birdhouse. He was pounding a nail when his father came along to ask if he could help. John accepted his offer, and his father proceeded to grab some nails and other tools to begin. Okay? Tricked you. One more numbers recall here, all right? I'm gonna make it easy for you. 9, 7, 9, 2, 4. Raise your hand if you think you can remember them all. Okay, everyone's got, excellent. Now, think back to this passage that I read you, okay? What I'm going to do is I'm going to cycle through some words, and I want you to tell me, in fact, raise your hand. When you get a word, if that word was in the passage, I want you to raise your hand. Keep track of how many, well, we'll see. You're going to see the answer at the end here. Okay. Was John in the passage? Okay. Was birdhouse in the passage? Yep. Evening. Fall, father, nail, hammer, wood, weekend, tree. Okay. Before I give you the answer, I'm going to show you here in a minute. Can anyone just kind of tell the story as close to the way, I just want someone to kind of raise their hand and try to tell the story as close to the way I told it as they can. Anybody? I know this is probably putting someone on the spot. Oh, thank you for this ball. Okay.
One autumn morning, John was preparing to build a birdhouse. As he was setting out and pounding the nail, his father came and asked if he could also help with, pounding the nail. And then the father brought out some nail and the hammer, and then the work began.
Great. Thank you for doing that. Thank you for trying. And actually, that is remarkable how close you got. You did an excellent job there. Okay. So now let's just take a look at this. Over here you see these are the words that I read off, and the ones in red are the ones that were actually in the passage. And the other ones were not. Oh yeah, father, right. I got that. My bad. Father. But I still did get some of you because there were some that got fall and I think even evening and hammer. Hammer's the one that throws people off a lot. So weekend, I think there were some weekend. So you can see that it's clear. So you did an excellent job. You got almost everything right. There were a few, but you threw a hammer in there. I heard you threw a hammer in there. But you did an excellent job of getting really close to this. If we had waited even longer, so basically if we waited till this afternoon to retell the story, I'm guessing that the story would sound the same. Like you'd get all of the facts behind the story, but the words would continue to be different and different. What is the point of all this? The point is that there is a distinction between meaning and the symbols that are used to convey meaning. Now, that sounds like, yeah, okay, why are you telling me that? What's the big deal? It's obvious. Well, from an instructional standpoint, it's really significant because it has to do with the notion of between abstraction and meaning. If these things are separate, then it's critical to understand that when we show someone symbols without meaning, they're not going to understand what it is that you're trying to say. If I say to somebody, well, to be a good manager, you have to listen well, and you have to show empathy. You have to be empathetic. That's an abstraction. Ultimately, I'm using a symbol set to try to communicate something to you, and you may feel like you understand it, but you are not going to understand that as much as you would if I said, watch this manager for a second. Watch this manager.